In other videos, I talked about different forms of associative learning, like classical conditioning and operant conditioning. In this video, I'm going to talk about observational learning, which is quite different from those associative learning styles. Observational learning is an example of latent learning. Latent learning is learning that occurs but isn't usually engaged in by the person until later, and in some cases, it can be years later. It's a very passive form of learning, which means that the person isn't really fully aware of it at the time, and it can happen somewhat unconsciously. Not all latent learning involves necessarily watching other people either. For example, the idea of cognitive mapping is an example of latent learning that doesn't necessarily involve watching other people. A cognitive map is a physical description of your surroundings based upon your interactions with your environment. I always like to explain this with the example of new college students that come to campus. If you're new to certain surroundings, you're probably really unfamiliar with where everything's located. So students that are new to campus may only know at the beginning of the semester how to go from, say, the parking lot or the bus stop to their classroom. However, after many days, weeks, maybe even months of going from point A to point B, the students start to get a better understanding of the layout of the campus. This doesn't happen from them noticing where the bathrooms are or vending machines or picnic tables consciously. It's just from them kind of soaking up their surroundings from going from point A to point B. This is latent learning in action. With observational learning, we're extending that to actually observing other people. Observational learning, in my opinion at least, is where we learn the vast majority of our behaviors. People are hardwired to watch and to observe, and we engage in this behavior really from a pretty young age. Frequently, we learn this from watching other people, and we call this modeling. The focus of our attention for models changes throughout our life. Early on, our models may be our parents or siblings, other kids at school. Later in life, it moves on to friends, coworkers, colleagues. One of the interesting things about observational learning is that with the associative learning styles, we're directly involved in the learning process. However, with observational learning, we learn not just through what happens to us personally, but also what happens to the people around us. We call this vicarious learning. It's learning from watching the benefits or consequences of behaviors for other people that we're observing. One of the first psychologists to really explore observational learning, and to this day is associated the most with observational learning, is a man named Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura is best known for an experiment that he did called the Bobo doll experiment. During this experiment, young children observed lab assistants interacting with a large toy called a Bobo doll. A Bobo doll was a large inflatable object with a clown's image on it, and essentially you could hit it, kick it, push it, and the Bobo doll would always kind of right itself up. So basically it was really bottom heavy and would just kind of bob back and forth but always remain standing. During the Bobo doll experiment, lab assistants would hit, kick, punch, strike these Bobo dolls, oftentimes even with things like toy hammers, and even throw them. And the whole time they were doing this, a group of children were watching them interact with the dolls. Later in the experiment, the kids were put through a stressful period. Basically, they were playing with toys and the toys were taken from them. However, the Bobo doll would remain. These kids vented their frustration by attacking the Bobo dolls in exactly the same way that the assistants demonstrated earlier. This experiment and many others by Bandura helped him formulate his social learning theory that helped explain how observational learning shapes a person's behavior and can bridge the gap between behaviorism and cognitive psychology. We'll talk about the social learning theory and Bandura's contributions to psychology again later in many different videos on different topics like development and personality. The social learning theory holds that observational learning happens in 4 stages. Those 4 stages are attention, retention, reproduction, and finally motivation. I like to remember these by thinking of the mnemonic of a forearm. So 4 to stand for how many stages, and the arm to remember those stages. You just have to remember that there's 2 R's. Let me expand on these 4 stages a little bit more. First stage is attention. Attention means we have to be paying attention to what behavior is being modeled for us. Retention means we actually remember what is being modeled. Now, some behaviors may require more active processes to have someone, especially a young child, pay attention and remember what's being shown. Think of something like showing a kid how to tie their shoes or ride a bike. Other things may just naturally be more memorable, like a child seeing something really traumatic or scary. The third stage is reproduction. So young children in particular tend to mimic behaviors that they see around them. In fact, there's a whole stage of development where children engage in pretend play and dress up. Usually they're reproducing the behaviors of the adults they see around them. The final stage is motivation. This stage can happen many years later. Essentially, it's that the person has to have the right motivation to bring out the behavior. A lot of behaviors are learned through this type of observational learning. Many times, these are things that we're not even really fully aware of either. After all, if I were to ask you how you learn to associate certain behaviors as being masculine or feminine, could you tell me what specific events shape those ideas? Even things like social customs, language, parenting skills come from observational learning. One really sad example of the social learning theory in action involves children that were exposed to domestic violence. Remember where I said some events just naturally are going to grab someone's attention and make it easier to remember? Well, if you're a young child seeing your parents beating one another, that's probably going to get your attention, and it'll probably be a memory that you're going to retain. In fact, some children are haunted by those types of memories well into adulthood. The next stage is reproduction. Children who are victims of violence or observe it tend to demonstrate those behaviors as well. In fact, at this point, it's pretty well known that most children that engage in bullying have been bullied or been victims of violence themselves. Oftentimes, counselors see where children that have witnessed or been victims of violence will act in violent ways with other children, adults, or even their own toys. The final stage is motivation. If you've ever heard somebody talk about the cycle of domestic violence, it means that children who observe or are victims of domestic violence often find themselves in violent relationships in adulthood. They are motivated into certain behaviors because that is what has been demonstrated to them as children. The difference is that now they find themselves in the role of the boyfriend or girlfriend, the mother or the father. None of this is meant to sound like it's inevitable, though. Psychology is based on the belief that you are able to change your life if you want to. Certainly, there are plenty of people that come from horrible childhoods that became really amazing adults with no issues at all. There are also plenty of examples of people that came from wonderful childhoods that find themselves in really difficult situations as adults. However, in psychology, we talk about probabilities. And this is a great example of there being a correlation rather than a simple cause and effect. It should also be noted that observational learning doesn't just happen from a person observing actions in real life, but also through things like video games and films. In fact, there's been an ongoing controversy over what role things like violent video games may have in influencing violent behaviors. If you find this topic interesting, let me know what you think about the role that observational learning plays in making people violent by leaving a comment below. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting comments from people, so I can't wait to read those. If you're enjoying content like this, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and give me a like with the thumbs up icon below. This helps me to continue to expand these videos and provide amazing content like this to all my viewers. Thanks for watching, everybody.